Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today at our Expert Roundtable on the progress in high-level waste management and the sustainability of nuclear energy. People from around the world have registered to participate in this event. To ensure a stable connection, and considering the large number of attendees, your video and audio functions have been disabled. We've received a lot of questions from you so far, so there's already a long list of questions to be asked during the Q&A session. If you have additional questions, or if you experience any technical difficulties, please use the chat function. Please be aware that we may not have enough time to take all of your questions. Today's discussion is being recorded and will be made available online in the near future. It is now my pleasure to give the floor to the Director General of the NEA, Mr. William D. Magwood IV.
Thank you, and good morning, and good afternoon, and good evening to all of you around the world who are joining us. Thank you for attending this expert roundtable on a very important subject. We at the NEA, like many of you, have been impacted by the COVID crisis. We are working remotely for the most part, and we are taking the opportunity of having these excellent platforms such as Zoom in order to communicate on important issues with a larger number of people. We have done a series of these events, and this is the first time we have done one specifically on sustainability of nuclear energy in the context of nuclear waste. Today, we're going to bring together experts from around the world to talk about the progress that's been made in managing nuclear waste, and to show that there is around the world a very strong scientific consensus that nuclear waste is being managed appropriately and can be disposed of with environmental sensitivity and long-term sustainability. We're going to begin today with an opening remark from a very important speaker, our close colleague, Dr. Rita Baranwal, who is Assistant Secretary for the Office of Nuclear Energy in the U.S. Department of Energy. Dr. Baranwal has been a great partner of the NEA for quite some time, and I'm looking forward to her remarks. So Dr. Baranwal, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bill. Can you hear me okay? All right, very good. Thanks for inviting me to join today's discussion. I'm Rita Baranwal, the Assistant Secretary for Nuclear Energy here at the U.S. Department of Energy. I'm very pleased to join this important discussion with a group of like-minded countries like Japan, France, UAE, and Sweden that are represented here today. And I hope that you all are continuing to stay safe during the midst of this pandemic. I'm glad that we could come together virtually, even in these unprecedented times. I really appreciate the interest to continue the dialogue on the subject of high-level waste and our collective ability to forge ahead with using nuclear as an integral part of our energy mix. But I want to begin my remarks by being pretty candid with you all about my thoughts on the theme of today's expert panel discussion entitled Progress in High-Level Waste Management and the Sustainability of Nuclear Energy. Now, when I saw the flyer that was sent out, it mentioned, I believe in the first paragraph, that there was a debate about the sustainability of nuclear energy. And the flyer went on to say that some consider high-level waste as an insurmountable challenge for which no solutions exist, thereby making nuclear energy unsustainable. Granted, I think there's room for debate in some areas, especially since we're still in the midst of developing innovative solutions and exploring the possibilities as it relates to the various applications of nuclear energy. However, waste is not an area where we are unclear or struggling or without solutions. We know what to do with the waste. It's not a barrier to expanding nuclear energy around the globe. And nuclear is indeed sustainable. Many countries see nuclear energy as a means to meeting their energy demands and growth, supporting their clean energy goals, and providing energy diversity and security. Backed by its high standards of safety, security, and non-proliferation, nuclear energy contributes to sustainable development and is a crucial part of the global energy future. So today you're going to hear from experts on the panel about the effectiveness of placing high-level waste in deep geological repositories, There's a shared confidence in the scientific community in this technical solution. Admittedly, there are challenges associated with stakeholder engagement, gaining public acceptance, and even multilateral cooperation. But those social challenges do not reflect challenges with the technical solution. Obviously, we have to continue to work on those social challenges, and they will continue to be of utmost importance to the implementation of policies supporting deep geological repositories. The discussions today provide us an opportunity to share our progress in the technical solutions, as well as explore the social challenges and our progress in those areas as well. We have a real opportunity here, and working together, we can definitely go far. Thank you for allowing me to join you. I hope you have a very productive discussion.
Thank you very much, Rita. It's a real pleasure. And I certainly, as you know, you and I have talked about these subjects, and I fully agree with your comments. And thank you very much for making them. And look forward to working with the Department of Energy to push forward with making sure that this issue is made as clear as possible. So we will move on to the panel. Thank you, Rita. You're welcome to stick around and listen, but I know you're very busy, so please feel free to depart. We will hear from a series of speakers next, and I'm going to begin with a very important partner for the NEA. This is going to be Jean-Paul Mignon, who is a former general manager of the Belgian Agency of Radioactive Waste and Enriched Fissile Materials. He is also the longstanding former chair of the NEA Radioactive Waste Management Committee. And he is a person who brings tremendous experience and expertise in this area, and I'm looking forward to his remarks very much. So Jean-Paul, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Bill, for that very kind introduction, and it's a pleasure to see you again, naturally, and all the colleagues. I will begin with a general introduction. You know that today there are 440 nuclear reactors operated worldwide. Additionally, 55 are under construction and 109 are planned. But the sustainability of nuclear energy is questioned, as long-term management of spent fuel and high-level radioactive waste is seen as unresolved by many people at the time being. It's a matter of fact that spent fuel and high-level waste represent a long-lasting risk for a long time span, millions of years, far beyond what we can manage actively, of what can be managed actively by men. It's therefore necessary to resort to a solution which does not require human intervention. There is a large consensus in the scientific community that deep disposal in stable geological formations provides a predictable environment over the long time frame necessary so that the waste, thanks to radioactive decay, does no more constitute a potential hazard for humans and the environment. This consensus finds its roots in the report published in 1957 by the United States Academy of Science, The Disposal of Radioactive Waste on Land. Currently, after decades of research, this consensus is completely consolidated. This consensus was particularly reinforced by the results obtained in underground laboratories. The underground laboratories were progressively constructed from the 80s, essentially to build knowledge on geological disposal, for instance, to support the safety case. Nearly all countries operating nuclear power plants built one or more laboratories. Belgium, Canada, Germany, Japan, Sweden, Switzerland, United States, and so on. Opposition, among other by local population, began to rise after the accidents in 3 Mile Island and in Chernobyl, which fueled the mistrust of the general public towards nuclear energy. Today, the general scientific consensus on geological disposal is not sufficient to win the consent of the population for the siting of laboratories, let's say, of a disposal facility. What is the crucial issue and for who? It is essentially for policymakers, because the ultimate responsibility for ensuring the safety of spent fuel and radioactive waste management rests at the level of the state. There are some principles to guide the decision process. The first principle that we can use is the principle of intergenerational equity. We must avoid transferring the negative consequences, environmental, economic, and social, of our development model to future generations. Consequently, it's up to our generation to develop and implement without excessive delays a solution for the spent fuel and waste resulting from the operation of the nuclear power plants. Second principle is the precautionary principle that was also adopted in 1992. And naturally, there are many interpretations of that principle, but let's take a positive one. And if we take a positive interpretation, this principle implies an objective evaluation of the risks and uncertainties to take measures that are well in balance with the existing knowledge and to increase the level of knowledge if necessary. The implementation of a repository, as soon as the necessary knowledge is available, is in that way a correct application of that principle. And last but not least, the polluter pays principle. The polluter pays principle aims to make bear by economic actors the negative externalities of their activities. This implies to monetize the damage to the environment. Estimating the disposal costs is an essential element in the application of that principle. The better the storage project will be defined, e.g. based on a reference design and a chronicle of disposal, the better the polluter pays principle will be applied, and the better we will be able to provision for future costs. In modern societies, the decision process can only be successful if public support and trust is achieved. The implementation of any major new technological project, despite the technical merits and proven safety, must satisfy social requirements. The lack of public support has considerably slowed down the implementation of geological disposal in many countries. Most countries have delayed the implementation after 2050 while keeping deep geological disposal as a policy. Some countries are reevaluating the situation. Countries where the implementation is successful have involved the general public at an early stage in the decision process based on clear commitments at national level and full participation of the local communities concerned. They have implemented a step-by-step process with defined milestones, allowing progressive and informed decision in the frame of a transparent and broadly participatory approach, and offering the flexibility to reverse decisions if needed. The role of international cooperation is also of paramount importance. From the beginning, disposal of radioactive waste and spent fuel, if considered as waste, has been the subject of intense international cooperation. The major multinational organizations, NEA, OECD, IAEA, EU, have framed and financed research activities in close cooperation with their members. They have explored all the aspects of long-term management of all types of radioactive waste, first technical and economical, and in a later phase, societal. A large cooperation happens around the URLs by joining efforts in the realization of common in situ experiments and by exchanging researchers. But involvement of different actors needs to explore some area more in depth. For instance, the dialogue of the way of dialogue between the different actors is still to be developed. In the frame of the NEA, we had for this the Forum of Stakeholder Confidence for the participation of the general public in the discussion. Another point is to have to develop a frame for an effective dialogue between regulator and implementer. Last but not least, there is also a need to foster cooperation at policy level to identify key elements to successful implementation of deep disposal, recognizing the social and cultural specificities of each country. That was my contribution to the panel, Bill.
Thank you very much, Jean-Paul. I appreciate that orientation. I think it was a very good philosophical overview of what we're dealing with. And I appreciate the highlight of the Forum of Stakeholder Confidence. I think that, as you heard from Dr. Barenwal, the biggest challenge that we really face is not so much science and engineering, it's really more public policy and sociological communication. To highlight this further, I'd like to invite the current, your successor in the chair of the Radioactive Waste Management Committee, the current chair, Mr. Umeki, who is executive director of the Nuclear Waste Management Organization in Japan, who, as I said a minute ago, is the chair. So, Mr. Umeki, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Director General Margaret, and good morning, afternoon, evening, or evening, everyone. I'm Hiroyuki Umeki, chair of the current chair of the NEA Radioactive Waste Management Committee, and it's a great honor to be here to address the RWMC as an introductory remark. More detail of radioactive waste management activities can be referred to at the NEA website. The RWMC was created in 1975 in addressing radioactive waste management challenges, as Jean-Paul mentioned. In the past 45 years, RWMC has played a significant role in building the scientific consensus that deep geological repositories are a safe and effective approach to permanently dispose of spent nuclear fuel and high-level waste. Independent national regulators applying globally accepted radiation protection standards have endorsed their effectiveness to isolate spent nuclear fuel and high-level waste from human and the environment. The RWMC consists of the senior representative from regulatory authority, radioactive waste management organizations, policymaker bodies, research and development institutions, and decommissioning organizations from 33 NEA member countries. Several RWMC member countries are making very good progress towards the establishment of DZRs. In particular, after a long and careful technical assessment, the National Safety Authority of Finland has granted a license to construct a DZR. This National Waste Management Program is on track to begin disposal operation by the mid-2020s. Extending its perspective based on the increased requirements by the member countries, RWMC is taking a holistic, sustainable approach to manage radioactive waste to cover from the generation to disposal of radioactive waste, focusing on three aspects: environment, economics, and society. The sustainable waste management is in turn a key for the sustainable development of the nuclear energy program. Its working party, the Integration Group for the Safety Case, has been developing strategies for compiling a robust safety case for geological disposal. Forum on Stakeholder Confidence, as Jean-Paul also mentioned, fosters learning about stakeholder communication and examines to enhance confidence in developing geological disposal. The regulators of Forum has been discussing regulatory aspect of the geological disposal as well. International collaboration can effectively pool resources to generate significant value to research studies for similar challenges in radioactive management program, including geological disposal. International policy cooperation and harmonized national policies can facilitate collaborations and can contribute to delivering national radioactive waste management studies. I look forward to the fruitful discussion at this webinar, which further promote the development of sustainable waste management and nuclear energy program. Thank you very much again for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I appreciate your overview of the work of the RWMC. So as you've heard already, we base a lot of today's discussion on two recent documents issued by the NEA, one of which was the document that focused on the scientific consensus around deep geological repositories. A lot of the conversation you will hear is based on much of what came from that. Another document we released recently was a report of an international high-level roundtable on the final disposal of high-level radioactive waste that had been suggested initially by the government of Japan, then which was later joined by the US and many others to engage in high-level conversation about how we can propel the work of establishing deep geological repositories forward. One of the participants in that discussion was Patrick Landres, who is the High Commissioner of the French Alternative Energies and Atomic Energy Commission, the CEA. He is our next speaker, and he will give an overview of this roundtable and talk more about where France is moving in this area, and particularly focusing on stakeholder involvement. So, Patrick, please.
Thank you, Bill. Hello, everybody. Following what has been said by Jean-Paul, there is something we should understand, is that besides the scientific and technical aspects, the most important factor for successfully implementing deep geological repositories is stakeholder confidence. And this is clearly due to the extremely long timescale and the associated difficulty of demonstration that risk assessments can be conducted and protection goals can be verified for such long timescale. That means something like hundreds of thousand years. Then robust decision-making process to develop geological repositories should be based on stakeholder confidence and requires an open and transparent approach that involves stakeholders. According to their national policies, such processes have been implemented in all the countries that conduct DGR projects. The approaches and tools, such as public debate, national consultation, working groups, participative governance, and so on, may differ depending on the local and national parameters, but the process always aims at the public and all other stakeholders' effective involvement. In order to discuss this very important topic, at the end of 2019, representatives from 15 countries, the NEA and the International Atomic Energy Agency, participated in 2 international roundtables that were partly dedicated to stakeholder involvement and engagement. And at the end of those roundtables, several key messages which were associated with decision-making processes emerged from the roundtable discussions. First, a stepwise, adaptive, and fully transparent decision-making process that involves key stakeholders is already effective in several countries. The step-by-step implementation builds confidence in a DGR project and increases the probability of success. Engagement with stakeholders should be recognized as a long-term process that occurs continually throughout the decision-making process and life cycle of a deep geological repository operation. That means something like 100 years. The stakeholder trust and confidence in the local DGR project is known to increase where they can see that other countries are approaching the solution to waste disposal in the same way as the local project they are facing. Third, while financial support for the host communities can be important, it is not deemed to be a primary factor in gaining confidence. There needs to be an added value, especially that includes benefit of the DGR project over the long term to the host communities. This durable support should be aligned with regional economic development, improvement of the overall well-being of the community, or educational support, for example. Fourth, involving younger stakeholders in the decision-making process is not only imperative, but also effective, as they will inherit the project in the future. Engaging with new stakeholders may require new and innovative communication approaches. Social media, use of video helps to establish and maintain dialogue with younger generations. Communication and dialogue should also be explored with a very wide range of scientists and experts, including those outside of the domain of nuclear science and engineering. You probably know that several countries are now reaching or approaching the licensing phase of their disposal project. With the future construction and operation of DGR, governments and waste management organizations have to think to new paradigms and innovative ways of governing the DGR project from their initiation to the final implementation. The need for information, the increasing expectation of public concerning the environmental issues, the role of social networks, and the defiance of scientific experts. The recent COVID crisis, at least in France, is a demonstrative example, are altogether legitimating for an adapted and innovative way of governing DGR projects in order to answer to those new factors in society behaviors. Just some elements on the French case and some new information. In our French case, the identification of the project that can structure the future of the territory around the CGO project in the east of the French Paris Basin was carried out in a collaborative way. It showed that we have three major options: productive economy, territorial innovation, and territorial service offering. In parallel, in order to feed the declaration for public utility and the construction license application, three major consultations issued were also identified: the integration of the DGR into the environment and the region, the design of the underground disposal facility, and the governance of the DGR during the industrial pilot phase. They were associated with 4 themes that were discussed through 17 meetings organized since 2018 with more than 1,000 local participants. And these themes were the spatial planning and quality of life, the transport infrastructure, the supply of energy for CGO, and the water cycle. Finally, the goals that may be reached using this way of discussing and interacting with the public is to propose a governance plan integrating the main principles of consultation and the governance issues that are identified during the different meetings, and to formalize the good practices, pluralist body, continuity of exchanges, visibility, reporting, and so on. Thank you very much.
Very, very insightful comments. I think that much of what you've discussed has been a feature of the former stakeholder conference, which again we heard about earlier, and the point that you made about bringing in younger generations, I think, is extremely important. We had a former stakeholder conference national workshop in Switzerland, I guess about 2 years ago now. And one feature of that, which was quite remarkable, was having very young people. Some of them were even teenagers that were participating in the discussion. And it was amazing to see how much they became the focal point of the conversation in the room, because I think the participants were very interested in seeing how young people perceived the issues and how they learned about the issues and what they thought about them. So it really proved to be a very energizing aspect of the conversation. So we just heard about the stakeholder engagement aspect of this, which is very, very much central to progress in building and citing a DGR. We heard earlier about the technical aspects, which of course are extremely important. Now we're going to hear where some of this comes together, and that is on the regulatory side. To talk about The regular perspective, we have Jessica Palmqvist, who is head of the Division of Research and Development with SKB, Swedish from Sweden, to describe the Swedish experience in licensing and also sharing their research facilities. So, Jessica, please.
Thank you, Director General. First, I just want to make a correction. I'm actually from the implementer side, so I'm not from the regulator side. But after almost 40 years of research and development, in 2011, when SKB submitted the application for the KBS3 system, our licensing process really started. Before we can actually start our construction work, we need a governmental decision. And on the way to receiving this, we have passed several steps. For example, a thorough and careful review of our application by the Radiation Safety Authority, and also an environmental hearing in the environmental court. But most recent, we actually received the acceptance by the municipality of Östhammar for us to build a final repository there. We are now expecting the government's decision, and hopefully in a not too distant future. We have proven that our KBS3 method is safe, accepted, and possible to implement. And even if it's been a long journey and not always a straight one, I would say, I am convinced that SKB wouldn't have come this far in the licensing process without actually extensive international cooperation in research and development. The international cooperation started already in the late 1970s at Stripa mine in Sweden, together with Canada, Finland, Japan, US, UK, and in Switzerland. We worked there for several years. And just to mention one of the notable results from the Stripa period is actually the different types of task forces that was initiated, and which of many we still see are active today. For example, in groundwater flow and transport, and also in sealing materials and techniques. The international cooperation has continued at Espe Hard Rock Laboratory after that. Espe has been a crucial utility for our program in Sweden, and definitely our licensing process. And not only for the research purposes and the research we've conducted there, but also for actually building the confidence and trust for the method that we have applied for. At Espe, we have deepened our process understanding. We have tested materials, techniques, and equipment for the engineered barriers, as well as actually developed monitoring systems and data models, and often in actually joint projects together with other national programs. I would say that no matter where you are in the process of developing a waste management program, the need for research and development will be there, but just in different shapes. And I would say that by working together and using existing facilities, it is possible to save cost for infrastructure, for example, by sharing the underground laboratories that's existing in the world. You can actually save time and minimize risk by actually using the knowledge and working together with others in different projects. You also get access to knowledge and competence. For example, when it comes to data and to models, you can use existing real data from the different types of projects that you've been doing when you're developing your own models. And maybe something that's even more important, I would say that working together and using existing facilities and using sharing resources, you actually can work on enhancing the confidence and trust and building the stakeholder acceptance that we're talking about here. I believe that the international cooperation will be even more important in the future to come. The research and development needs infrastructure, for example, like the underground rock laboratories. And I think we can and we should use and develop these existing resources even more to be able to contribute to the success of several national programs to come in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I know that was a major point of discussion during the International Roundtable that we were talking about earlier. The fact that these facilities are really precious resources internationally and can be leveraged by many countries because the geologies are similar enough that we can learn a lot of important lessons by doing experiments in different facilities. So thank you very much for highlighting that. We're going to hear next from another perspective, which I think is a very interesting perspective from a newcomer country. We're going to hear from Jamal Al-Habi, who is a radioactive waste management director from Emirates Nuclear Energy Corporation, ENEC. And Mr. Al-Habi, the floor is yours, and we're looking forward to hearing how a new country deals with these issues in this decision making. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mahgood, and good afternoon to you from Abu Dhabi. Yes, indeed, I will be giving you a UAE perspective and approach as a newcomer for the management of spent fuel. I will take you back to 2008, to the early stage of the development of the nuclear program. The UAE government back then issued a policy called the UAE Nuclear Policy. And this policy clearly stressed from the beginning the need for a robust and the long-term spent fuel management program. The policy commits to the development of a comprehensive national radioactive waste and spent fuel program from early on, a program with a high standards of safety and security and non-proliferation. Soon after this policy, and in line with these key principles of the policy, the government passed a law, the nuclear law, that has a clear provisions when it comes to spent fuel management. It established an independent regulatory authority, which is an important step. This authority will regulate activities with respect to spent fuel and radioactive waste. And in fact, FANA, the regulatory authority now, has issued regulation on disposal of spent fuel and radioactive waste with a clear safety and licensing requirements for the siting and construction and operation of future disposal facilities. Also, when it comes to the roles and responsibilities from early on, a designated entity, the kind of a waste management organization, will be established and will be responsible for the timely and safely development of a spent fuel management program, including, of course, the operational and decommissioning waste from the nuclear generation. Also, in addition to that, the law requires a funding arrangements to be in place early on in the program to ensure that there is sustainable and sufficient funding for spent fuel management over the many decades to come. As you know, as we approach the commercial operation of the first unit here in the UAE, this arrangement is already in place. So these are the key steps we have in place when it comes to spent fuel and radioactive waste management. On the exact strategy for spent fuel management, our draft national policy regarding the long-term management and disposal of spent fuel adapts an open fuel cycle. UAE considers direct disposal in a deep geological repository the reference option for its spent fuel. Although it's an early phase in the program, but we have plans to start research and development, to start site investigation, site studies, including, of course, engagement and collaboration with similar programs around the world. So in short, this is how the UAE as a newcomer is approaching the management of spent fuel and radioactive waste. And these steps are key in ensuring there is a strong and robust waste and spent fuel program from the beginning of the nuclear industry. This is how the UAE is going about spent fuel and radioactive waste. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that overview. And it's as we have encountered and had conversations with people in UAE over recent years, we've been very impressed with the level of planning that has gone into the nuclear program. Of course, many countries have had difficulty with the nuclear waste issue in terms of planning and implementing programs. So hopefully you'll have learned some lessons from others who have made mistakes in how they've sited facilities and conducted their public communications and avoid some of the delays we've seen around the world. So we appreciate that very much and look forward to having your participation on the roundtable. Next, I'm going to hand the floor to Patrick Letterman, who is a member of the National Academy of Technologies of France, and who is also the chair of the NEA Committee on Technical and Economic Studies on Nuclear Energy Development. We call it the Nuclear Development Committee. The Nuclear Development Committee is interested in a broad range of issues, but particularly, I think, in recent years, become increasingly interested in new technologies and how new technologies might address the back end of the fuel cycle. So Patrick, looking forward to your contribution today. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bill. Yes, technology development can bring additional benefits to the back end of the fuel cycle. The spent fuel reprocessing and recycling of uranium and plutonium. Since 90% of the long-term radiotoxicity of spent fuel is from plutonium, and it's a good recycling is a good example of circular economy. It allows to reduce the DGR, the Deep Geological Repository footprint, and the high-level waste is incorporated in a glass matrix, which is very extremely resistant. And the glass is poured in a glass canister, in a stainless steel canister. And I think this glass canister is also an additional benefit. One step of recycling is already utilized at industrial scale in several countries and in light water reactors. And there are ongoing development for further additional steps of recycling of plutonium. Also, full plutonium recycling can be provided by fast neutron reactors. And I will just mention, for example, two examples on technology development. One is advanced small modular reactors with sodium-cooled reactor in complement to light water reactors. Another example is molten salt reactor. Molten salt reactor is a different concept with liquid fuel. It's a chloride plutonium salt. And here you can see that there is a system, because it's a completely different technology for the back end of the cycle, and you need to develop together the reactor and the fuel cycle. It's important to have a system view. Ultimate step would be partitioning and transmutation of minor actinides, americium and curium. But here we are facing high technical issues, and it is still at the low TRL, I mean low scientific readiness for this minor actinide, either in fast neutron reactors or in a dedicated system like accelerator-driven systems. But anyway, in any case, deep geological repository is needed. And as mentioned by the recent NEA report by Bill Magwood, this report clearly shows that there is an international worldwide consensus, scientific and technology consensus, that deep geological repository is a safe solution for spent fuel and high-level waste disposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Appreciate that overview. And I should also note that that we have currently an activity coming together that brings together the Nuclear Development Committee, your committee, and our Nuclear Science Committee to explore what the next steps might be with these new technologies to partition and transmute long-lived species in nuclear waste. So this is something that's been a long-term interest of mine, so I'm looking forward to seeing where that work takes us. I think it'd be quite exciting. Our final speaker before we begin the panel discussion is is Mr. Ro Nasu, who is Director of Radioactive Waste Management Division of the Agency for Natural Resources and Energy at Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, METI. I asked him to share with us his perspective on the International Roundtable we discussed earlier, which held 2 meetings, one in October 2019 and the other in February 2020. Floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Director General Magut. As everyone discussed, final disposal of high-level radioactive waste is a common challenge for all nuclear power using countries. The major challenge is a lack of public confidence. We believe that strengthening international cooperation is effective in experience and knowledge sharing, both technical and social knowledge, both implementers level and governmental levels. And it helps progress DGR development for each country, especially for countries like Japan at early stage of siting process. From this point of view, International Roundtable on Final Disposal of high-level radioactive waste and spent fuel was launched during the G20 Energy Ministerial meeting held in Japan last year. In the 2 roundtable discussions, 15 countries and NEA and IAEA shared a variety of experience and lessons learned on stakeholder engagement and discussed potential areas for international technological cooperation. NEA published a wonderful summary report this summer. So I think it is very valuable that each country considers carefully other countries' experiences and incorporate those lessons into its own country's strategy. As for Japan's case, we have continued a public dialogue all over the nation. And last month, 2 municipalities expressed acceptance of a literature survey, which is the first stage of site investigation process. The progress was made as a result of intensive public dialogue based on the lessons learned from international community, including international roundtable discussions. We think that learning the latest best practices of international community and improving our siting process under international cooperation is very important to realize geological disposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we're pretty much on schedule, so I'm going to launch into the panel discussion. We're going to be joined by Mr. Mika Pohjonen, who is Managing Director of Posiva Solutions in Finland. And we'll ask a few questions. I want to start with Mika, and we'll go and make sure all of you have a chance to comment for a couple of minutes. So the first question that we're posing is, given the fact that we have so much confidence in the deep geological repository science, the question becomes one of really implementation. And in that respect, what considerations do you believe exist to prepare for the transition from construction to operation of a deep geological repository? And let me invite all the panelists to join us on camera.
Well, I just could start concerning this transition on the French case, and from the transition to the construction and operation for CGO, the growing environmental dimension, the generational and organizational changes, and the long development time for management solutions. So that means that all these factors are very important in order to consider the transition between, let's say, a DGR on the research and technology, and then the operations and the construction. And there is one thing which is really
problem. Do you hear me?
Hello?
No, please, Patrick, continue.
Okay. There is one thing which is important to consider. This is the upscaling between the level of underground research laboratory, for example, and the real size of a disposal. If you consider this, it's at least 10 times bigger. So there is a real upscaling. And then the real issues of this upscaling in terms of science and technology are transposing the results which are acquired at the scale of the URL to the disposal scale. And even if the experiments that have been conducted in the URL are at a real geometrical scale, the environment of the experiments is not fully representative. They are widely representative, but not fully representative of the real environment of the disposal condition. The second thing is that some demonstration operations have been constructed in the URL at a reduced scale, let's say 10% to 50%. Some others have been constructed on surface, and there is a need for a final upscaling that could be operated, for example, through a pilot phase within the disposal in order to fully demonstrate the feasibility of the construction and to carry out a very final tuning of the technical tools and methods. Two other things are very important in the upscaling. The first one is the modeling of the behavior at the scale of the structure of a repository. That will necessitate, for example, the use of high-power computing, which is quite different from what we are using in terms of numerical capacities at this stage. And the second thing will be the management of huge quantities of data, which will be generated over 100 years, for example, by the sensors which are in charge of monitoring the repository. These are typically upscaling processes that we need to anticipate, and this upscaling is generally anticipated, and which are carrying new challenges in terms of science and technology. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very, very interesting. And I think you're making some very important comments, particularly with the data handling. I think this is something that the Radioactive Waste Management Committee has been talking a lot about recently. And this is an area where I believe that there's tremendous opportunity for international cooperation to develop formats and approaches that everyone can use instead of every program creating its own approach to data management. I think Mika is going to be able to talk to us now. So Mika, if you can hear, do you want to try to make your comments? Don't know if he can hear us. Mika, can you hear us?
Yes. Oh.
Okay, please.
All right, I took the phone into use now. So in fact, answering that question very shortly because I use time, is that possible is exactly in this phase. So we are at the moment constructing, we have moved research and development organization, also constructing organization, and we will soon move to the operational phase. I would say just to name one, the most important things is to manage the huge organizational evolution from these phases and different organizational setups, because the expertise and skill portfolios in these phases, they differ very much. So this is something we have worked a lot on and we keep on working on.
Excellent, thank you. We appreciate that very much. And thank you for using the phone to communicate. Jean-Paul, comments?
Thank you, Bill. Yes. I will elaborate a little bit further on what Patrick has said. In the reality, the project will last or cover 3 centuries. We began in the 20th century, we are in the 21st century, and it will end in the 22nd century. So activities will happen during all that very, very long period. It is really an historical period. And what is important is to have very accurate records of what has happened. Records about the disposal configuration that can evolve during that period. The records of the waste in place, the records about what has been measured, Patrick said, during operation. Because, and it is a matter of fact, after closure, the only thing that will remain are the records. So I think to have a well-developed system to keep the records, to manage the records in the long run, and to protect the records, not to lose the records, is something very essential.
And again, I think this issue about data and records is very important, but maybe you can make a quick additional comment. How long do these records have to be maintained?
As long as possible. Yes. There is no intention to forget the repository. So we have to try to keep the records if we are still able to read them for a very for the longest time possible. But at a time we will forget. It is not possible to keep it indefinitely. So we have to develop methods and so on and so on. We had a program within the NEA to look at that for record keeping for the as long as possible time period.
And maybe Jessica, you've been listening to this conversation. I'm sure as an implementer, this is a central issue for you to face.
Definitely, I totally agree with the former speakers, both Jean-Paul and Patrick and even Mikas. But I will also add another view on this transition phase. It's, of course, there's several remaining issues to prepare for, but one thing that we are actually talking a lot about for the moment and have much in focus is a little bit the thing that Mika talked about, that moving from a research and development organization into a construction organization. And we need to add new competences and resources in our organization. And we need to make a lot of decisions regarding what to make and what to buy. What kind of organization should we as an implementer be really, really good at? What are our strategic sources or strategic competences? So, and we need to have the long time period in our mind at the same time when we do this, because we will work for more than 70 years in a operational phase. How do we actually manage the strategic sourcing of the competences that we need, and also how do we manage the knowledge transfer over generation, even during operation, because we have been working for 40 years and we will work for another 70 years, and there will happen a lot, but we still need to remember where we came from.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation, which I hadn't given a lot of thought of myself. Exactly, if you need different types of expertise to over the course of 100 years, you have one or two choices. You either find a way to get others to provide the expertise and you contract and supply it from outside, or you internalize it. Internalizing is very expensive. And so I guess how have you handled that? Is there a balance that makes sense, or is it really just sort of situational depending on the particular project?
But I think what we are trying to do is actually to look at what type of project is it that we're going to do. We don't have to be very good at doing the construction work. There are actually others out there that have this competence and have been doing that for the last 100 years. But what we should be good at, and the crucial competences for us, is actually the core competences regarding the waste and our method and our system as a whole.
Interesting. So let me go back to Jamal for a UAE perspective on this, as a country that hasn't really started the major work to develop a repository quite yet. How do you react to all this? It sounds like there's a lot of work ahead for UAE. I'm sorry, you're muted. Still muted. Good.
All right. Okay. So indeed, we are, early on in the program, and when you look into the situation, And really due to the extended storage of spent fuel before it's disposed of. I think one aspect to further consider is further understanding of the aging of the fuel assemblies and the fuel rods and the performance issues during the extended storage of spent fuel assemblies. Some programs, and especially for newcomers, the envisioned disposal repositories are planned way in the future, which means spent fuel will be stored in the interior storage for extended period of time, and before it's eventually transferred and transported to a final destination. So I think we need to continue the research and studies to evaluate further spent fuel performance during storage, and to extrapolate and predict these performance according to to the requirements for the future disposal. I'm sure there has been massive progress in this area, but I believe for newcomers, having a solid aging management program from the beginning of the program, especially if you have harsh environment, for example, dry storage in the open air, high temperature, high humidity. I think it's very important to monitor the performance and the aging of the fuel assemblies and the fuel rods to ensure the ease and the transfer and transport of these fuel assemblies in the future to an operational repository.
Yeah, I agree with that very much. And I think there's a lot of experience around the world with different environments for long-term spent fuel management. There's a lot of research underway right now in that area as well. So it's actually a quite interesting area of exploration. And we'll wrap this part of the panel up with Patrick Letterman. Patrick, please, any comments?
Just to mention that there is an important work to define and prepare the specific licensing process for the operation phase of the deep geological repository, and it will take time between the safety authorities, the waste implementer, and the waste producer for the definition of this licensing process for the operation phase.
Okay, thank you very much. Before we move on to the next question, anyone have any burning comments they would like to make on the panel? Okay, I don't see any requests for the floor, so let me ask the next question. And we've talked a bit about stakeholder engagement, and what should governments do in your view? And I appreciate this, particularly from Jessica's standpoint. So I'll give her some time to think about this, because this means she gets to ask the governments tell the governments what she needs. But what are the government's roles in engaging with stakeholders at the local, regional, and national levels? And maybe Jean-Paul, you could start us off.
Thank you, Bill. I think the first duty of a government it is to define a policy. You know that in the frame of the European Union, you have a directive dated 2011 that asks all the member states of the Union to define what is the policy regarding the safe management of radioactive waste and spent fuel. So first, a policy. And the second thing, at governmental level, it is to design a clear and open decision process. In fact, the question is, how will we decide together on that issue? And what are the values that we have to make that decision? I think it is, in a nutshell, it is all what have to be done. Naturally, it is a huge work, but how to define it is very simple. So all the governments did it very early in Finland, in Sweden, also in France a little bit later, and that are the governments and the countries that have success in implementing deep geological disposal.
Thank you very much. Mr. Nasu, comments? What is the role of government?
Thank you, Director General. I understand the role of government may depend on the countries. In Japan, especially after Fukushima nuclear power accident, people have serious concerns about not only the safety of geological disposal, but also the nuclear policy and energy policy. Therefore, Japanese government decided to take a leadership role for public understanding activity for geological disposal. Government published nationwide map for scientific features, which describes favorable areas for geological disposal, and held more than 100 public meetings all over the country with the implementing agency, Newcomer, in the last 3 years. In the meeting, government explained and discussed nuclear policy and energy policy, as well as final disposal directory. I think this is a good opportunity for local people to understand nuclear policy and energy policy, and also a very good opportunity for government to understand people's interests and concerns for nuclear and energy policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we heard from Patrick about the French experience with this, and maybe Patrick, you could talk a bit more about what the government's role is in this part of the discussion, in the stakeholder engagement.
Yes, Bill. And if you just consider the French case, the major characteristic of the involvement of the government is the inclusion of the organization, the strategy, the R&D, the governance related to waste management program into successive laws that were passed at the parliament. And this is a fundamental aspect of the French case. And this specific process has been set up as soon as 91 in order to facilitate the follow-up of the results obtained at different levels in the framework of the law. And this is valid, whatever the political side of the government. So we got some changes from the right wing to the left wing since 1991, but in all the different governments, this principle of governing the implementation of the governance of waste management in France went through laws, which is very important. And then the government, as it has been said by Jean-Paul, the government tried to facilitate the administrative procedures which are related to the preparation of the licensing phase for the CGO project in a transparent way, obviously. And it takes all the necessary legislative measures that are needed in order to progress toward the licensing application as a function of the decision of the safety authority, obviously. So, but the major thing is a law, and everything is going through the parliament, which is extremely important.
To create the stable policy framework for progress to go forward. So let's get the implementer view on this. Let's start with Mika. I'm saving Jessica for last because I telegraphed that, so I want her to give me a really good answer. So Mika, please, do you have some thoughts about what the role of government is in this situation?
Yes, in fact, in the Finnish system, the implementer is always responsible for the main part of the stakeholder engagement and in statutory processes, and also especially outside statutory processes. As far as governmental and state organizations, regional municipal organizations are concerned, they have their statutory roles, as mentioned by the previous speakers, which includes interaction with stakeholders. But at least in Finland, they have managed to exceed the requirements in these statutory requirements. So they have been ministry, regulatory authority, municipal authorities. They have been very active in their stakeholder communication and engagement, and this is what I consider very important.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Now, finally, Jessica, what do you think? What should government be doing to make your job easier?
Yeah, I agree with the earlier speakers, and I agree with Mika. It definitely helps if they set stable a stable environment for us with laws and policies that we actually have a framework to work within. But I wish that in Sweden, the governmental or the national level has been not that active in stakeholder engagement. And I think that is a really important thing on the national level, because we have the responsibility and we work very much on the local and regional level. But actually to reach out to the national level, I think the governments should work a little bit more proactive in this area, together with us, of course, because the proof of burden is on our side to show this.
But before we move off the stakeholder issue, I wanted to come back to Jean-Paul, because since he's retired, he can speak without fear of retribution. I wonder, Jean-Paul, as you were chair of the RWMC, and of course you have so much experience in this area, you've seen both government-run nuclear waste disposal activities, and you've seen activities that have been run by the industry. And I wonder if you have any observations about what the pros and cons of the two approaches are, because if you think about the role of government in this, in some respect, the role of government is to make sure that the waste gets disposed of, but so they set the policy, but in some cases they actually have to implement. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about that. I'm sorry, Jean-Paul, you're muted.
Okay. I was saying that it's a tricky question. I think that everywhere it is considered that the end responsibility, the ultimate responsibility is with the state. I think it was a matter of debate also in Sweden to get before the last step for the decision. And I think it must be clear, because at the long run, only the state can take the responsibility for such long period of time. That's a question of long-term stability. Naturally, you can say that it is the industry that has to implement, or a specialized agency. I think that are the two more current way to do. If it is a clear responsibility of industry, naturally industry is motivated to have a good solution, a solution that is accepted by government, and you will have normally less discussion on the cost, because they master, in fact, the cost of their project. With an externalization of the waste issue in an agency, I think the agency will also do its best effort to have a technical solution. You can have more discussion regarding the financing, because the industry that has to pay at the end will require for some optimization and so on, without jeopardizing, naturally, of contesting the need of the disposal facility. I think that it is cultural. Any country has to choose a system that is closer to the political system in the country, and certainly the culture in the country. And it is a matter of debate in each country. You know, countries as France have a very strong state approach. So I think that what they have chosen is normal. In Sweden, I think, and in Finland, the process is more deliberative and more near to the public. So it is a question of cultural approach. But first, the ultimate responsibility is with the state, that is supported for safety by the safety authorities. It is also important to mention. And then the goal has to be clear: a safe disposal facility at a normal cost, I will say. This is what I can say to give an answer to the question.
That was a very good answer, I think. Thank you very much for that. So our time is growing a bit short, so I'm going to distribute the remaining questions that I have a bit among you. And I'm going to start with moving to what is the role of international cooperation in advancing the development of deep geological repositories. And I'd be particularly interested in hearing a UAE perspective on that from Jamal. So Jamal, could you give some comments about what you think the role of international cooperation
Indeed
is?
Yes, I think it's an important role for all. There has been success in cooperating and exchanging information and data. The NEA, IEA, doing really well on this and bringing, interactions together and knowledge sharing. And I think, for new programs, there is so much to learn and so much to build on. And the focus should be more on new issues and avoiding kind of reinventing the wheel, and again focusing effort on the unique challenges these newcomers will face, whether it's geology, whether it's environment, or whether it's design of the fuel or anything else. So for us, we are keen to pursue collaboration and joint work when it comes to spent fuel management. We have initiated a nuclear research and development program, and part of it is to collaborate with other institutions on joint projects for spent fuel and radioactive waste. And I think it's the way forward for all. We need to work together. And I think one success in one region or a country is a success for all when it comes to spent fuel and radioactive waste. And it's great to see NEA and other organizations facilitating these kind of platforms and discussions, and that's part of how we cooperate and collaborate at an international level.
Thank you very much. We appreciate those comments. Patrick Letterman, what do you think about this international cooperation?
I just would like to illustrate the international cooperation and the need for that with one example, because all of us, we have to share our expertise, to pool our resources, because the cost of performing research and technology for this type of equipment is quite high. And then the pooling of our resources is very important. Pooling is also important for preparing the future, because we need, as it has been said previously, we need to have these competencies, technological and scientific competencies, over 100 years or so. So we have to pool the things and to help together in order to have, for all of us, the best competencies available. And there is a very representative example of this efficient technological and scientific cooperation, which is the European program, which is named EURAD, that aims at pooling the effort and sharing the scientific and technical knowledge. And the research which will be conducted into this program will aim at integrating the scientific knowledge at the repository component scale. That means that we are not in the basic research. We are more and more close by the technological aspect and the operations to strengthen the robustness of the performance of the safety analysis, to reduce the conservatism, and to evaluate also the possible optimization of the repository's architecture. This, the first phase of this project will benefit for a budget of something like 60 million euros, which is quite important. And 25 European and non-European countries are involved into this program. So I think that this is typically the example of the progressive cooperation, the interaction between the different WMOs, which lead to this very efficient program we all need for increasing the confidence and to evaluate each other in our program, which is important. There is no science, no technology without evaluation, and we need that.
Thank you very much. And let me get a Nuclear Development Committee perspective on this. Patrick, what are your thoughts?
Yes, there is also the Generation 4 International Forum, which is internal collaboration of 14 countries, member of this forum, for international collaboration on R&D program development for nuclear energy systems. And the word system is important because it addresses both the reactor and the fuel cycle. And waste optimization, waste minimization is a very important objective in this international collaboration. And I want also to mention that OECD NEA is a technical secretariat for this Generation 4 International Forum.
Good. Thank you very much. And Mr. Nasu, comments about what you see as the most important aspects of international cooperation.
Thanks, Director General. Financial and human resources for research and development related to DGR development can always benefit from wider exchange within an international community, I think. And underground research facilities are invaluable resources for all countries, especially in early stages of the DGR siting process. So I totally agree with Jessica's comment about ESPO underground research facilities. Following this roundtable discussion, we are planning to launch a new joint international project at Horonobe URL in collaboration with other URLs. For the first step, we are preparing to hold a workshop next spring in collaboration with the NEA. Thank you.
Yes, and we're looking forward to that. So thank you for highlighting that. As time is running out, I'm going to go to the last question and ask a few of you to react to the most sort of central question, perhaps, that this webinar was focused on, which is what the role of radioactive waste management plays in ensuring sustainability of nuclear energy. And I think that Dr. Barenwall gave a very strong statement, her views on this. So I appreciate hearing yours as we close out. And perhaps Jamal, you could go first.
Indeed, yeah. I think it's again, it's an important role having a rigorous and successful radioactive waste program, demonstrating really the viability and sustainability of the nuclear energy. And also, success would mitigate, the doubts and the risk and the uncertainties that normally associated with nuclear energy when it comes to spent fuel and waste management. And I believe it's an integral part of the nuclear power generation, and it should be. And there are solutions exist today for radioactive waste, especially low-level waste, which demonstrated an effective isolation and containment solutions. And I think it's a matter of time from a technical point of view. The challenges are manageable. Social, of course, and the political issues shall, eventually be resolved with certainly more commitments from governments and more engagement with the key stakeholders, and that would make the world to continue to enjoy and utilize the clean and reliable nuclear energy.
Thank you very much. Mika, what do you think?
Well, I would crystallize this in one of the main messages of Posiva, which we are very proud of. So our main argumental message in this field is that we have a solution for final disposal of spent fuel. Therefore, we have a significant role in climate protection as a part of the life cycle of carbon-free sustainable nuclear energy. So we think that solving this let's say, last big issue, nuclear in the eyes of the audience is very important for climate change protection of mitigation as well.
Thank you very much. Jessica, what do you think?
It's a quite tricky political questions, I would say, but as an implementer, I think I mentioned earlier, the proof of burden is, of course, on us that we have a safe solution for the disposal, and our mission as an implementer is actually to manage and dispose the radioactive waste in a safe and secure manner for all human beings and for the environment in more or less the future to come. So, and if we can do that, and if we actually can show it and then get the public acceptance that you have a safe solution for the waste. I think that's fundamental for the nuclear energy.
I think we all agree with that. And Jean-Paul.
Yes, Bill. In my view, the radioactive waste issue is not an argument allowing to question, in fact, the sustainability of nuclear energy. Indeed, if we look at the facts, there is a safe solution for the different categories of waste. We know that surface disposal is a well-established industrial practice for low-level waste in many, many countries. In the United States, there is an underground disposal facility operating for medium-level waste, transuranic waste from nuclear programs. And if I remember well, in 2015, the first geological disposal for spent fuel was granted its construction license in Finland. It should be operated within 5 years, I would say. So we can state that deep geological disposal is a safe solution, but in many cases, its implementation is slowed back by a lack of national commitment and public support. But those are not grounds for unsustainability. Sorry. That's my personal view.
I appreciate that very much. And our time is essentially up. We did have a few questions, several questions from the audience, and I will, if Patrick Londe can answer one very quickly, I'll give him the honor of answering the only question. So I think he's very well suited to answer it. And it's how important are social sciences and humanities in nuclear waste management? It's a very interesting question.
It's a good question. It's not that easy for different reasons, because at the very beginning, we were just speaking about acceptability. And acceptability is not the good way of approaching the question of integration of the management of nuclear waste into the society. So I think that the very beginning of our relationship with those researchers that are involved in social sciences were not that good. And then, step by step, we began to have real discussion with them and ask them to provide us some analysis of the way we should improve our way of interacting with the society and with the local citizens. It takes time because it's not that easy. And at least in France, it's in quite a lot of universities, the researchers involved in social science are not really fond of nuclear energy. So it's not that easy to ask them to help us in order to improve our way of discussing with the public. But anyway, it's that's the same thing that for the general science and technology. It's a long-term activity, and we still have to improve ourselves in order to interact with them.
I agree with that. And maybe Patrick Lederman, I know that the Nuclear Development Committee has actually talked about this issue, and maybe you'd like to give just a very brief comment about social sciences and nuclear.
In fact, it is just starting, and we will see how to involve social in each activity of the committee. So it's something that's going to start now.
Well, I think we're actually a little bit over time, but I think the conversation was a very good one. I thank all of you for your participation, your very insightful comments. Enjoyed the conversation very much and look forward to continuing this dialogue. I think it's a very important dialogue. I want to highlight that both of the reports that we mentioned today on deep geological repositories and also the outcome of the International Roundtable are both available at the NEA website. So please, anyone who is listening, feel free to download that and read it at your leisure. And with that, I will hand it back to the disembodied voice to begin closing us out.
Thanks to all of you for participating, and thanks to our speakers. For more updates and news, we also encourage you to follow us on social media. The NEA is on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Thank you, and goodbye for now.